Okay, so next we need to look at maternal deprivation. So this is the second of Bowlby's theories. You've got Bowlby's theory about how attachments are formed, and then you've got the second theory, which is Bowlby's theories about maternal deprivation. So if you lose an attachment with a mother figure. Just a bit of background to this, it comes under the kind of the heading of disruption of attachments. Bowlby looked at this after the Second World War, when children were evacuated and separated from their mothers. So it's kind of the background to kind of Bowlby's work on disruption of attachments. You used to have to know a bit more research on this. So you've got there used to be some work on privation, which people that haven't formed a bond or haven't formed an attachment with anyone in the first place. And kind of a good example of this is Genie, which some of you might look at in English in kind of language development. And then the specific thing we're looking at is maternal deprivation. So that's where a bond or attachment has been formed with the main caregiver, but then it's been disrupted for some reason. So it's not explicitly in the course, but there's some really interesting stuff on privation, on kind of children that have been brought up without a primary attachment. A really famous case of this is Genie. So I've got the video for you to watch of Genie. It does link to language acquisition in English, as I said, and it's just quite an interesting case to look at. And there is a difference here between separation and deprivation. So sometimes we're separated from our attachment giver or our primary attachment figure. So separated is just when we're not in their presence. So if you leave a child at nursery, that would be separation. It's different from deprivation. Deprivation is when you lose kind of an element of care. Brief separations aren't significant, but Bowlby suggested that extended separations can lead to deprivation. So short separations are fine. Extended separations are potentially can lead to deprivation. You can get this thing called maternal deprivation, where the child is separated from their main caregiver. And remember, Bowlby's always going to assume that that's their mum, so that's why it's maternal deprivation. In terms of short-term separation, you would expect babies to be upset to start off with, and then be pleased when they see their caregiver again, and that links to Ainsworth's theory of securely attached children. And there was some research by Robertson and Robertson about separation, looking at children who had been taken into care or were separated from their parents. This again just gives you a bit of a background on the deprivation and kind of where Bowlby's theory came from. You can use this as research, so it's on here, it's on the PowerPoint. Robertson created this model called protest despair detachment. So babies are unhappy to start off with if they're separated, then they'll be kind of really upset. But if the separation continues, they'll start to become detached. And it's the detachment that kind of links to Bowlby's maternal deprivation. So Bowlby argued that long-term deprivation could be harmful, and that deprivation from the main caregiver during the critical period, so that first 3 years of a baby's life, would have harmful effects on the emotional, social, intellectual, and physical development of a child. And that's the important thing. So Bowlby said that maternal deprivation will impact on various aspects of a child. It's not just their emotions, so it's emotional, social, intellectual, and physical development. He argues that continuous care from a mother is essential for normal psychological development, and prolonged separation will cause serious damage to the child in terms of their development. So in a way, Bowlby's saying that any separation from the mother could result in deprivation, that the mother should be providing continuous care. Now, Bowlby differentiates between separation and deprivation. Separation is when the child isn't in the presence of the primary attachment figure, but it's deprivation. It's this prolonged separation that can cause the trouble. So Bowlby's arguing that the first 3 years, or specifically kind of the first 30 months, is a critical period for development, and it's the separation from the mother in this period that's going to be important, and that psychological damage is inevitable. It's a very deterministic theory. Bowlby argues that any kind of separation will result in harm, will always result in harm. There's no free will here. Some of the effects of deprivation are intellectual, so low IQ, emotional development. Bowlby argues that children can become affectionless psychopaths, so they can lack emotion. and this was investigated in his 44 Thieves study. So what he looked at were kind of 44 teenage delinquents, and they were interviewed to look at their character traits, and their families were interviewed to see if they had had any separation when they were younger. Bowlby found that 14 out of the 44 thieves he would classify as affectionless psychopaths, and 12 of these psychopaths had separation from their mother in the first 2 years, and he concluded that early separation or deprivation could cause this affectionless psychopathy. So you could become an affectionless psychopath due to prolonged deprivation from your mother in the first 2 or 3 years. So that's a 44 Thieves study. So this can be used as research to either describe the theory, or you can use it as AO3 if you're talking about Bowlby's maternal deprivation theory. Some more information on the same study. In terms of evaluating the research, so evaluating Bowlby's 44 Thieves study, there is gender bias. The samples all boys. It's case studies, so you could argue that you get lots of qualitative data, but it lacks population validity. You can't generalize it beyond the group that it's done. The data is retrospective, so it's people looking back. So there's errors in that and errors in recollection. It's correlational, so we cannot prove cause and effect. And you can't establish much causation in this. So there's lots of evaluation points there. If you want to evaluate the research, you would not need to know all of these, but you just need to know some. This is from your textbook as well in terms of evaluating the research. Support for Bowlby's maternal deprivation hypothesis. You can use research by Goldfarb, who looked at children in orphanages and children that have been fostered at different times to see what effect that had on their development. Goldfarb's research again. When you're talking about maternal if you're evaluating, maternal deprivation, not the research, so the concept of maternal deprivation. So there's your concept again. That's what Bowlby means by maternal deprivation. And if you're evaluating that, it has conflicting amounts of evidence. There is counter evidence. You've got the argument that there's a sensitive rather than a critical period. And then you've got a psychologist called Rutter who argues that Bowlby's confusing deprivation with privation. So there's more on these evaluation points in your textbook and in your booklet.